But first we'll begin with the prayers. Beginning with the prayer of praise to Shakimuni Buddha. Tempa chundende dejin shepa drachampa yangdapa sumpe sanje repa dang shapsu tempa dewa shepa jitin tempa jebu doe kalo jua lana me pa ladang minam chi tempa Sanje chundende peljawa shakya dupala shasalo churu chapsu chiwo. Teacher, Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly pure and complete Buddha, all-knowing, having poise, Sugata, apprehender of the world, navigator of beings to be subdued, incomparable, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha, the Bhagawan, the glorious conqueror Shakimuni, we prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. In the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. Sangye chodang choi chi chog nam la jang cho ba du da ni cha su chi da ge jin so ji pe so nam ji do la pen chi sangye refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. The short Mandala offering. Saji pochi jujin me todram lera lengjen yede Sangye Jendo Mente Oaji Trokun Nam Dajenla This ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, adorned with sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such pure lands. And the seven-limbed prayer. I prostrate my three doors with a mind of respect and offer all actually arranged and mentally emanated offerings. I reveal all the downfalls and negativities that I have ever collected and rejoice in the virtues of individuals and superiors. Please remain perfectly abiding until Shache tso re la go chasa dame damba de yi se chi cho jelve se pa con chi con amre Trame shendo trope namroa. Me Pam Jambe. The precise thought is in commentaries written by Jambavipa's ornaments, Nagarjuna and Asanga. I prostrated at the feet of those most renowned in the three realms. From these two great chariots come the excellent lineages of the paths of profound view and vast deeds, their essential points gathered thoroughly into the lamp holding this treasury of instruction, giving explanation through compassion, by seeing precisely and completely the essential points of all paths of Sutra and Tantra, holder of the conqueror's entire holy Dharma, prostrations to the glorious Losang Drogpa. I, seeing all the infinite teachings, supreme way of crossing for those entering the journey to liberation, moved by compassion to deeds skilled in method, prostrations to the spiritual masters who make everything clear. So before I realised that Anna was leading a session on Shakimuni Buddha meditation this weekend, I'd already decided to do the Shakimuni Buddha meditation today, but I only just remembered. But you can't have too much Shakimuni Buddha meditation. I thought it's particularly appropriate given that we're going through, or beginning on, or continuing through the Four Noble Truths, and that this was Shakimuni Buddha's, oh, I beg your pardon, I forgot the Great Treasury of Excellence. Thank you, Manikam. One more prayer to go. So we'll recite the Great Treasury of Excellence, the prayer of the Path to Enlightenment, which is on page 27, and then we'll do our meditation. The kind Master is the basis of all qualities, and proper alliance is the root of the path. By seeing this excellence and through much striving, bestow blessings to be devoted with great respect. This gentle support of freedom obtained this one time is most difficult to achieve. Knowing its great value gives rise to a mind seizing its essence constantly day and night. Bestow blessings to generate this continuum unceasingly. It is like a bubble in water, this constantly moving body and life. Thus remember the swift collapse of death. Beyond death, like body and shadow, white and black karmic results follow after. By gaining firm certainty in this, the massive faults, subtle and very subtle, are abandoned, and the accomplishment of all virtuous collections completed. Bestow blessings to ever retain conscientiousness. The qualities of samsara are unfit to be trusted. The door to all suffering, do not be content with these enjoyments. By knowing its defects, bestow blessings to develop a great aspiration for the bliss of liberation. By that pure thought, great conscientiousness is drawn forth, and mindfulness and awareness of the individual liberation, the root of the teachings. Bestow blessings to make this the essential practice. Just as I myself have fallen into samsara's ocean, all living beings as mother are also like that. By seeing the responsibility for the liberation of beings, bestow blessings to be trained in supreme bodhicitta. However, by merely generating the mind, if not acquainted with the three aspects of ethics, enlightenment will not be attained. By seeing this excellence, bestow blessings to train with strong effort in the vows of conqueror's Dharma. Pacifying distraction toward perverse objects, by way of proper analysis of the perfect meaning, bestow blessings to swiftly and continuously generate the path related to the union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus, becoming a vessel trained in the common paths, enter the Vajrayana, supreme evolution of all vehicles. Bestow blessings to engage the easy path itself, that sacred way of crossing for fortunate beings. The base of practice for the two aspects of attainment is when guarding the pure vows of commitment is found to be genuine and certain. Bestow blessings to protect them even at risk of life. Then, by understanding properly the important points, which are the essence of the two stages of the Tantra classes, bestow blessings to practice according to these holy teachings, with continuous effort in the Supreme Four-Session Yoga. Like that, may the spiritual friend revealing the gentle path and the friends of proper practice stand firm. Bestow blessings to quickly pacify the masses of outer and inner hindrances. in all rebirths may I never be parted from perfect gurus and the enjoyment of the glorious Dharma. By utterly completing all qualities, paths and grounds, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. So now we'll do our meditation on Shakimuni Buddha. First, taking a few moments to settle the mind. Allowing our attention to gather inwards. Releasing all engagement with external objects of the senses, sights, sounds and so forth. Also, the wandering of the mental consciousness to memories of the past, plans or ideas about the future, so that for this short time we rest simply in the present moment. Our awareness settling on just one object. The natural rise and fall of our breath. Visualize in space in front at about the level of our forehead. From emptiness appears a precious throne, supported by 8 snow lions. In appearance, a precious throne. In nature, it is Shakimuni Buddha's wisdom truth body. On top of the throne, from emptiness arises a white-coloured syllable palm, P-A-M. This transforms into a white lotus flower, symbolizing the mind of renunciation. On top of the lotus arises a syllable R, A-H, which immediately transforms into a flat moon disk mandala, symbolizing the conventional mind of enlightenment, light-natured like a rainbow. Having one face and two arms. His one face shows that Shakimuni Buddha perceives the one nature of all phenomena, their emptiness of inherent existence. His two arms symbolize the two truths. His right arm symbolizing conventional truth, and the left, ultimate truth. His right hand symbolizes the practice of great method. His left hand symbolizes the practice of great wisdom. His right hand rests on his right knee in the earth-touching mudra, showing Shakimuni Buddha's power to stop all negativities, especially all suffering of the three lower realms. His left hand rests in his lap, in the mudra of concentration, supporting a bowl of nectar. The nectar that destroys all delusions, and especially all disease. At Shakimuni Buddha's crown is a white Om syllable, O-M. At his throat, a red R, A-H. And at his heart, a blue Hum, H-U-M. He is a monk wearing the 3 Dharma robes, showing his pure ethics. And he is adorned with the 32 major signs, such as his hands and feet being marked with wheels, and the 80 minor marks, such as copper-coloured nails. He sits in the Vajra or lotus position, emanating countless rays of light in every direction. And so we stabilize in this visualization for a time. Feeling that it is the actual Shakimuni Buddha, or our Guru in the aspect of Shakimuni Buddha, in space before us. And still holding the visualization of Shakimuni Buddha in front. Feel that we are surrounded by all fellow living beings, appearing in the aspect of humans. Recognizing that each of these living beings, without exception, wishes only for happiness more and more, enjoyment more and more, good health more and more, all good conditions more and more, just like us. but just like us. Each of these living beings experiences the faults of cyclic existence. Although never wishing for a moment's unhappiness, still continuously problems, sufferings and difficulties arise for all of us. And recognising this, we make the following request to Shakimuni Buddha. You are the Buddha jewel. You are the Dharma jewel. You are the Sangha jewel. And you are our protector. From this moment until we all attain enlightenment, please hold us with your great compassion. Please release us from all negativities of body, speech and mind. From the two obscurations. And from the suffering of lower rebirths. In response to our request, golden light emanates from the Hum syllable at Shakimuni Buddha's heart. Coming down, completely fills ourselves and all the living beings surrounding us, entering at the crown. We feel that all our negativities of body, speech and mind are purified. Our qualities flourish to their fullest. It is our great compassion, our great love, our bodhicitta, our wisdom, all realizations of the six perfections. So we stabilise on this for a short period. And then we visualize that Guru Shakimuni Buddha becomes smaller and smaller, condensing into a brilliant drop of golden light. Comes to the crown of our head. And entering at the crown, descends to our heart. We feel that our body and Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's body are non-dual. Our speech and Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's holy speech are non-dual. Our mind and Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's holy mind are non-dual. We release our attention and conclude the meditation. So we're continuing with Geshe-la's explanation of the Four Truths, or the Four Noble Truths, from Part 4 of Path to Enlightenment. And as we said last week, if we summarise them briefly, they explain first the truth of suffering, or true sufferings, or why any experience of cyclic existence, that is, any experience that's conditioned by delusion and karma, will ultimately be unsatisfactory. The second truth, true cause, explains why this is so, why it is that we experience cyclic existence and its faults, what the causes of that are. The third truth, the truth of cessation, that it's possible by understanding the causes of cyclic existence and by removing those causes to end our experience of cyclic existence. So it's possible to achieve liberation from cyclic existence, or nirvana, and this is true cessation, or the third noble truth. And then the actual method or path for doing that, from getting from where we are now to the state of nirvana, or the state of the cessation of suffering, is the fourth truth of true paths. And as we said last week when we began talking about the first truth, that the only point of understanding suffering is to equip us to be able to rid ourselves of the experience of suffering. From a Buddhist perspective, there's nothing ultimately whatsoever. That suffering has no good qualities whatsoever. The only conditional benefit of suffering experience is that it wakes us up to the realizations that might help us to escape from suffering, to eliminate suffering. And qualities such as resilience, compassion, and so forth that help us to benefit both ourselves and others. But from a Buddhist perspective, the focus is ultimately on the third noble truth, on the complete elimination and cessation of suffering. It's not about making our life more enjoyable or improving the quality of our life or the wellness of our life. Those things certainly come about if we practice meditation and practice positive actions. But the objective of Buddhism goes far beyond that, to the actual elimination of any possibility of suffering and to the complete perfection of bliss, happiness, and so forth. We talked last week a little bit about the fact that we might wonder why there's so much emphasis in the First Noble Truth on realising suffering. Aren't we staring at it in the face every day whenever we turn on the television, or in terms of the difficulties that we face in our own life? But as we said last week, at the very best, we have no more than a superficial understanding of the way cyclic existence works. We don't understand where our suffering comes from, and we certainly don't have any idea about what we can do about it at a fundamental level, how we can change our experience so it's free of suffering altogether. And we tend to have a recurring fantasy that we just need to fix up a couple of things in our life at any time, and that if we can do that, well then everything will be fine, and we won't have any more suffering in our lives. But we know from continuously trying that no matter how many things we try to sort out in our life, whether we're looking for a new job, whether we're looking for a new relationship, whether we're looking to move house, that we may succeed in achieving the change that we're looking for, but ultimately it's not going to make a difference to our experience. Ultimately, we will find that any experience within cyclic existence is unsatisfactory. And although we go through this continuously, we never really get it. We also always figure that there's this a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But when we get to the end of the rainbow, we find it just dissolves. I heard one example just today that said that our attitude to looking for happiness in this life and trying to get satisfaction from this life, it's a bit like trying to balance 3 strawberries on top of each other. We might fluke it occasionally, but it's never going to last. It's always going to be unstable. So the First Noble Truth aims to wake us up to this, that fundamentally, while our minds are conditioned by delusion and karma, it's not possible to achieve complete peace, complete satisfaction, reliable and continuous happiness. Or as we said last week, another way of thinking about it is that we can't get rid of suffering unless we are crystal clear about what it actually is. In the same way as we couldn't have done anything about COVID-19 unless we'd first identified in the first place that there was this thing called COVID-19, what its qualities were, what its causes were, and so forth. If we hadn't identified it in the first place, well then it would have simply infected everybody in the world, and things would have been much worse. So First Noble Truth, understanding in a deep way what the nature of our suffering is, what the nature of cyclic existence is really important. From the point of view of the structure of this explanation in Path to Enlightenment, we went through that in detail last week, so I'll only summarise it briefly. So we're going through the first part of the medium scope teachings, which it's in 4, but this is the first, which is called the actual training. It's the biggest section by far. What that the way that is structured is that the first thing that we do is that we identify the type of mind we need in order to achieve liberation from cyclic existence. And secondly, we need to understand the method for generating that mind. How is it that we actually generate a state of mind that will get us out of cyclic existence? Two aspects of that, of when we're focusing on the method for generating that mind. Firstly is to contemplate suffering and its sources. That's the first and second noble truths. And the second subject is the 12 links of dependent origination. So we're looking at the first, contemplating suffering and its sources. That in turn has two parts, and we're looking at the first of those, which is dealt with in chapter 13, which is titled Contemplating Suffering, in order that we really understand the disadvantages of cyclic existence. In turn, the first part of that, why the Buddha taught suffering first, which Anna covered a couple of weeks ago. And so now we're looking at the second part, which is the actual meditation on suffering. And in the text, that begins on page 393. When we're looking at the actual meditation on suffering, which we're about to head into, again, that's dealt with in two ways. So firstly, there's an explanation of the general sufferings of cyclic existence. So these are the sorts of experience that we might have in any rebirth situation within cyclic existence. These are the types of experience that are the common lot of every type of samsaric being. Secondly, the text looks at the specific sufferings of cyclic existence. So this follows on from the explanation in the small scope teachings about the faults of rebirth in the lower realms, and expands upon those to explain that even if we had conventionally a very high rebirth within cyclic existence, nonetheless, because it is within cyclic existence, it has specific sufferings. And that section, when we get to it, talks about the types of suffering that are experienced by beings in the demigod realms and the god realms. When we're looking at the general sufferings of cyclic existence, these are grouped into three different sets. So firstly, we look at it from the point of view of 8 different types of experience. Secondly, from the point of view of 6 different types of experience. And then a summarised version, the 3 different types of experience. So these are just different ways of talking about the same subject, or different angles, if you like, on samsara. So they're not inconsistent at all, and they do overlap. So for example, if we're looking at it from the point of view of the 3 different types of suffering, those 3 different types also in one way or another also include the 6 types and also include the 8 types. And likewise, everything in the 6 sufferings also covers everything that's within the 8 sufferings. So we might ask at the beginning, why do we have these different types of classifications? 8, 6 and 3, wouldn't 1 be enough? So looking at each of these separately and in different ways, and looking at it from the point of view of different angles, helps us to develop a more thorough understanding of the nature of cyclic existence and its faults. If we listen, study and meditate on these subjects, then we're taking our own mind repeatedly through a more thorough and deep understanding of what the qualities of cyclic existence are in their own different ways. And if we're familiar with them as a result of that, well, then it's easy to apply them to our own experience. And when we apply them to our own experience day to day, then it becomes more meaningful. Then it becomes a tool of actively interpreting the events of our life. And that way we integrate it more and more, and it helps us build our practice and make it something authentic. That's important because one aspect of our difficulty in understanding the first noble truth is that, or perhaps it's more a difficulty in understanding the third noble truth, that is of true cessation, that we're so immersed in the current way that we experience things that it's difficult for us to conceptualize something different. It's difficult for us to conceptualize the complete cessation of suffering. It's a bit like the way if we're a fish swimming in the ocean, it would be hard to understand water, because water is the medium that we're so immersed in. It's the only type of medium we've ever known that it's difficult to notice it and analyse it. It sits in the background. Or perhaps it's similar to the relationship between human beings and the atmosphere of this planet Earth. So if we were taken out of the atmosphere of this planet Earth for more than a few moments, then we would instantly die. But we have, normally day to day, we have no perception of that. And as we breathe in and out. So the Earth's atmosphere is fundamental to our existence as human beings, vital to our existence as human beings, but mostly it never intrudes into our consciousness. And the nature of cyclic existence is a bit like that. And so by developing our wisdoms of listening, thinking and meditation on the First Noble Truth, it helps us build our awareness of how it is that our minds actually work when our way of functioning is driven by delusion and karma. Another benefit that we get from understanding the 8, 6 and the 3 in detail is that it helps us to understand what the truth of suffering is saying in a much more subtle and nuanced type of way. So ordinarily when we hear the word suffering, instantly that calls to mind some type of clearly, manifestly unpleasant type of experience. So headache, or something that scares us, or being in a state of poverty, or being treated badly by others. When we hear suffering, that's the type of adverse experience that we think about. But in some cases, as we see when we're looking at the 8, 6 and the 3, we're actually looking at something that's much more subtle than that. It includes experiences that we might not explicitly label as suffering, using that first type of notion of things that are averse in some way or adverse in some way, but it also includes things that ultimately have an unsatisfactory nature. Or to put it another way, ultimately, no matter how much of them we have, no matter how long we go on, they can never, ever satisfy us. The fundamental wish, our fundamental driver as living beings is continuously and only to experience happiness. However, while we are in cyclic existence, while our 5 aggregates are conditioned by delusion and karma, there can never be any possibility of reliably satisfying that wish or that aspiration for happiness. And that's really the most subtle aspect of cyclic existence that it's useful for us to be familiar with. Otherwise, we can fall into the fallacy of thinking, oh, well, at the moment my life's not too bad, I've got enough to eat, I've got a reasonable job, I've got a place to live, what's all of this stuff about suffering? If we understand the truth of suffering at this more subtle level, it overcomes that superficial way of thinking. So the point of the First Noble Truth is not that everything in life is horrible and unpleasant and we need to renounce and give up everything we do and go off and become a Buddhist. It's to wake us up to the nature of cyclic existence. While we're in it, we will definitely and unavoidably go through some things that we experience as unpleasant. We can't do anything about that. But even things that we don't label as unpleasant, that we don't try to avoid, none of those things can ultimately, permanently and reliably satisfy our wish for happiness, no matter how long we take. Ultimately, it will leave us unsatisfied, not only in this life, but in all of our future lives. And so this is an important thing or an important understanding that we develop by studying and meditating on these different types of suffering that Geshe explains here in chapter 13. So firstly, there are the 8 that Geshe, and he lists them first on page 393 of Path to Enlightenment. Or actually they begin on page 393, and these are birth, aging, sickness, death, meeting the unpleasant, separation from the pleasant, not gaining what is desired, and in brief, the 5 contaminated aggregates are suffering. So each of these 8 items, with the possible exception of the last, which requires a bit more contemplation, are things that of the type that we would recognise as adverse experiences, things that we would prefer to avoid if we could, or at least they're presented that way. And with the exception of the 8th one that we'll come to, they're all quite easy to understand and to relate to in the terms of our own experience. And of course, they're most meaningful to us when we bring to mind instances in our own life that are of these types of experience. The first one, birth, that's a little bit more challenging to do because, of course, we can't remember what it was like when we were born. And here, when we're talking about birth, it refers both to the experience of being in the womb and the actual experience at the time that we were born. So that's a big blank. We can't remember what it was like based on our own personal experience, although we know that we certainly went through that experience and that every other human being similarly went through that experience. But we can try and approach it from the point of view of imagining what it would be like. So we can think what it would be like if at the moment we were fully confined for a period of months on end into a very small space, a space that was dark, a space that was filled with liquid. For all of that time, we would have no ability to control the temperature of the environment. Our body would be fully encased within the body of another living being, and we'd have no control whatsoever about our position or of our wishes. We're suspended in the bodily fluid of another being, and we are sustained by the food that other being has already digested. So if somebody said that now we were going to be placed into that situation for 9 months, it would be like a horror movie. So this gives us some way of approaching this description of birth. We can also think about it from the point of view of the description of the experience of birth itself, which kind of rings true if you try to creatively imagine it. So how overwhelming it would be to one's senses to suddenly be expelled from this completely stable, dimly lit environment of the womb into the noise and glaring light of the world outside. Or all of a sudden, for the first time, we see other living beings. Up until that point, we would have no reason to think that any other living being existed other than ourselves. These other living beings, all of a sudden we have the indignity of our whole body being taken up and handed from one of these, from one living being to another living being. We would have no understanding, no comprehension whatsoever of what on earth is going on. All of a sudden, this cataclysmic change has happened to our existence and is impinging on our consciousness. We would have no idea of what was going on, no ability to put it all together. We can imagine how confusing, possibly traumatic, that experience could be. And of course, the passage through the birth canal itself, or having our body extracted through surgery, again, we can imagine that wouldn't be it wouldn't be an experience that we would choose to go through. Path to Enlightenment says that the experience of coming through the birth canal is a bit like feeling that we're being squeezed, that our whole body is being squeezed between these two enormous rocks. We can also recall, as we said before, this is something that any living being such as ourselves can't avoid experiencing. If we're here now, we had to experience that. But more importantly, from the perspective of rebirth, for every birth that we have in future, that we will have to go through this experience again and again. The next of the 8 is the experience of aging. So this is something that we can relate to a bit more from our immediate and familiar experience. So maybe up into our early 20s, we still feel that we're immortal and that aging isn't really a thing, but we all know that it's downhill from there. Path to Enlightenment explains that here where we're talking about aging, we're talking about the process that begins immediately from the time of birth. It doesn't take all that long, given the normal lifespan, for our body to reach full adulthood, and from there, once we've reached that, maybe in our late teens, early 20s, then the capacity of our body begins to decline step by step. So Geshe quotes the extensive Sport Sutra on page 395, which summarises all of the delights that we experience as we age. So, age makes a beautiful body ugly. Age takes radiance and strength. Age takes happiness and humiliates. Age kills, and age steals the complexion. Now, generally speaking, we human beings find a youthful appearance attractive, and it has, I guess for us, it conveys some sort of meaning of freshness, of fitness, of vitality, and good health. But we all know that appearance is short-lived. People who are exceptionally, unbelievably attractive when they're young, with the passage of a few decades, can become invisible or viewed as very unattractive once they've become old. Just the process of living over a period of time completely changes our appearance. As we grow older, our health and fitness are definitely going to decline. Our sense organs lose their sharpness. We might experience cognitive decline, really tragic. Increasingly, we can lose our independence, something that we value so much. As a result of that, we can be infantilized. From our point of view, we're still the same person that we always were. We still have the same thoughts, feelings, wishes, and so forth. But to others, we can look as if we're just an irrelevancy, some object that's past its use-by date and just waiting to die. We can reflect on our own experience of aging, on our changing appearance, on the various manifestations of aging that we experience, those of our family, those of our friends, and we can recognise that this is the common lot of every living being in psychic existence. Once we have been born, then this inevitably is one of the experiences that we will need to undergo. And we'll need to undergo it for every future rebirth that we have within psychic existence. And it never gets any easier, any more satisfying, no matter how many rebirths we experience. The next of the 3 is the experience of sickness. So again, sickness is something else that we find very easy to comprehend. It's not a subtle phenomenon like emptiness or bodhicitta. Sickness is something that stares us in the face day by day. We never ever, if we could choose, we would never ever experience one moment of illness or sickness. But however much we wish that, however hard we try to look after ourselves, it's pretty much unavoidable to avoid the experience of sickness continuously. Unlike old age, that follows a more or less predictable sequence in time, sickness can strike us down at any time and at any age. if we have even a type of illness that's relatively mild, so we have a heavy cold or a bad headache or a toothache, while we have it, it completely dominates our experience. It's very, very difficult to extract enjoyment from life if we have a continuous toothache. We're just completely focused on it. All we can think about is being able to get to the other side of it. When we're sick, then all of the things that we normally regard as enjoyments in life, that we like doing, places that we like going, everything like that is put on hold. For that time, it's difficult to extract enjoyment from anything. On top of the sickness itself, it's easy for us to get anxious. When we're ill, we start having projections about the nature of the illness, whether it will get better, how serious it actually is. So we have this mental anxiety and disturbance on top of the experience of physical illness. In the cases of serious illness, then when we can become more dependent on others in order to just live our daily activities of life. So from a Buddhist perspective, we experience sickness continuously because as living beings through beginningless lives, we create karma and we are experiencing the consequences of karma that we've previously created. So we know from the teachings of karma that this does not imply that if we're ill, then we're just getting what's coming to us from a karmic point of view, rather that we're merely experiencing the effects arising from the causes that we have all created. And that every living being, whatever their situation now, we have all at some point created the causes that bring about the karmic result of illness. And we cannot remove those karmic seeds that bring us the experience of illness within cyclic existence until we've cut the knot of cyclic existence. So Path to Enlightenment gives a number of different ways of viewing sickness that enable us to bring it into our practice so that it isn't simply a negative and useless and averse experience to get over. So we know the teachings on impermanence teach us about the value when we're sick of reflecting on the fact that the experience that we're going through is impermanent. It's been produced by causes, immediate causes and karmic causes, and when the causes that have produced that experience have exhausted, then the experience itself will cease. Also, it enables us to better understand karma. If we view sickness in this way, or if we view it from the point of view of the great scope teachings of developing our patience, or we could bring it into the practice of Tonglen, of giving and taking, if we're developing bodhicitta, then it enables us through skill to transform an otherwise pointless and adverse experience into something that's the cause of our Dharma realizations developing. But beyond that, ultimately, there's nothing good, nothing positive about being sick. And while we're in cyclic existence, and these are the positive ways we can deal with it, ultimately, while we're in cyclic existence, we are going to have, this is one of the unpleasant experiences that we will undergo. And once we've escaped cyclic existence, then the karmically driven sickness will also cease. The fourth type of suffering of the 8 is death. So this is another subject that isn't all that difficult to understand conceptually, but we all know, and the teachings from impermanence explain this as well, that we don't understand it all that well, and one of the reasons is that we don't like to think about it too much. So we think about death as theoretically something that's out there, and in my case, it's going to happen to me at some distant, undetermined time in the future when I've finished doing all of the things that I want to do and I've led a full and enjoyable life. But it's difficult for us, and the teachings of impermanence try to correct this, to remind us that our death is absolutely definite, nothing whatsoever we can do about it. Secondly, that the time of death is completely uncertain. Doesn't matter how smart we are, doesn't matter how much we read, doesn't matter how much we study, completely unpredictable what time will actually leave this world. And thirdly, we don't focus on the things that will be really useful at the time of death. So the teachings of impermanence aim to correct each of those three misconceptions. If we could organise it that way, so if we could assure that we go on having fantastic good health, we'd probably prefer not to die. But like it or not, nothing whatsoever that we can do to avoid leaving this world. Path to Enlightenment focuses on it from making the point that at the time of death, we lose absolutely everything. So if right now, at this very moment, we were suddenly to lose everything that's important to us in this life, it would be absolutely devastating, completely traumatic. So if suddenly we were to lose all of our family, just in an instant, lose all of our friends, lose our house, all our money, all our clothes, all of our possessions, if that happened in an instant, it would cause us enormous stress, unhappiness and trauma. When we die, then we lose all of those things and more, because at the time of death, we also lose our most precious and intimate possession, our own body, which we actually identify with as being part of ourselves. At the time of death, we lose everything and we have no certainty about what's going to happen next. In most of our life, we can pretty much predict what's going to happen to us when we're facing our death. Completely impossible to know exactly what we're going to experience at the moment that we leave this world. If we have done some meditation, study and reading, built our wisdom of understanding impermanence, then we can certainly alleviate the shock and trauma associated with the prospect of death. Remember, what the teachings on impermanence do is merely getting us to look at death in a realistic way, merely getting us to look at what is, not making up some comforting fantasy about it, merely understanding the truth. And in a way, the truth sets us free. The more we don't turn away from death because it's an unpleasant subject, but understand it through the teachings on impermanence, the more we are able to approach it with a peaceful, mature and positive frame of mind, the better the chance we have of dying peacefully. But for many living beings caught in cyclic existence, then there isn't this opportunity, and although Path to Enlightenment makes the point we've experienced death innumerable times before, the prospect of death and the actual experience of it can be full of fear and difficulty. And while we're in cyclic existence and we're compelled to take rebirth and to undergo the experience of death over and over again, then repeatedly we experience this fault. Once we've freed ourselves from cyclic existence, then we don't experience deaths compelled by delusion and karma. And so this major source of suffering is removed. So given the time, that's where I'll leave off today. And at our next class, which will be in 2 weeks after the retreat, then we'll finish off the explanation of these 8 sufferings and begin on the next 6. Now there was one question that came through during the week that I'll deal with, and I mentioned last week. I gave wrong information. So if anybody who isn't here wants to pass on questions, the best way to do that would be to send it by email to events@tushita.org. And of course, anybody here who wants to, who is in class who wants to ask a question, can do so at any time. But the question that came through last week, and I'll paraphrase this, was that in Dharma practice we talk a lot about practice, and there are many ways that we can regard what we do in Dharma practice as a type of healing, but there doesn't seem to be so much explanation of what the healing process itself is like. So looking at it using that analogy is certainly an apt one, because it's one that Path to Enlightenment itself uses. So in the teachings of refuge. We often see Buddha, Dharma and Sangha likened to doctor, medicine and nurse. And in particular, it's our practice of Dharma, the realizations of Dharma, that heal us from the illness of delusions. If we're talking about how that happens, about the process of healing, to my mind, that's something that depends very much on the individual. I don't think that there's any one single way that we each experience the results of our Dharma practice. Depends on our personality, depends on our experience, depends on our karma. So I think the way that we experience the fruits of our Dharma practice comes down very much to the individual. So it's difficult to make a general statement about it beyond what I'm going to say now. The other important point to make is that our progress in Dharma practice, many Dharma teachers make this point, is that it's non-linear. So it's not simply that we go from this point to this point to this point continuously. It's often a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Again, depending on our situation and on our karma. What we can say, though, in terms of healing, is that in general, if we practice Dharma, if we go through the practices of the path to enlightenment, that we find that there is more calm in our life. We find, if we reflect on the practices of compassion, that kindness is closer to the service in the way that we relate to others. We tend to have a stronger and more stable mind, so that sometimes if we come across a situation that previously might have caused us a great deal of upset, that we find we have more resilience. Even if we do become upset, we might find that we recover more quickly. I'd also actually argue that Path to Enlightenment does address this in a way, that it does talk about the types of experience that we go through as we build our familiarity with the practices. So many of the subjects in Path to Enlightenment, as we move through the 3 scopes, talk specifically about the benefits of this type of practice. So, for example, if we're thinking about it from the point of view of the teachings of leisure and fortune, if we reflect on those, become very familiar with that, well, then what we're building is an enormous sense of gratitude and a feeling of our good fortune in our current situation of being in a human rebirth where we're actually able to practice and make a difference to our experience. I remember one teacher saying once that if we had the realization of perfect human rebirth, it would be impossible ever to be depressed, because the dominant sense that we would have was that we had won the lottery, that we're in this extraordinary, fantastic situation. And make no mistake, from the point of view of Path to Enlightenment, we are in this absolutely extraordinarily fortunate, wonderful situation. Our problem is, through obscuration, it takes a bit for us to recognise that. It's also explained in the teachings on impermanence what the benefits are of gaining the realisation of impermanence. One of them, as we talked about before, is that we become far more resilient. We deal much better with the fear and anxiety that we might otherwise have as we approach the possibility of our death. We become much more flexible as we begin to develop the realisation that nothing lasts, everything depends on causes. There's also a beautiful description of the benefits of the practice of great love, the benefits of the practice of bodhicitta, the benefits of the practice of calm abiding. So these are actually describing what our healing will be like as we become more familiar with these. And it's important to recognise that all of these descriptions, the benefits of great love, for example, of practicing impermanence, these themselves are subjects that we can and should meditate upon, because the more we do that, the more we get this intuitive sense of what the results will be as we continue in this practice. Another important thing to bear in mind, I think, is that this isn't just pie in the sky. So it's not like, well, I have to gain perfect meditation, perfect realization on the perfect human rebirth, and then I'll be filled with this continuous enjoyment of this situation. Step by step, just as we beginning our wisdoms of listening, thinking, and meditation, step by step, this process of healing begins. Step by step, we begin dealing with our obscurations. So anyway, that's my point of view. It's a good question. There could be lots of different ways of thinking about it, but that's what I came up with anyway. Anyway, thank you. So we'll do the dedication prayers. And we'll do the final prayer of the graduated path this week in English only. By the two collections, vast as space, amassed with effort for a long time, may I become a chief of conquerors, a guide for all beings whose mind's eye is blinded by ignorance. Also in all lives will not yet come to that, may Manjushri favour me with his compassion. Finding the supreme path, complete with all stages of the teachings, may I please the conquerors by practising well. By my precise understanding of the essential points of the path, with skillful means drawn along by strong compassion, and by dispelling the mental darkness of beings, may I uphold the conqueror's teaching for a long time. Where the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but become degenerate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, may I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvellous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring to liberation. May the conqueror's deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans who remove the obstructions and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path never be parted for all of their lifetimes from the purest of paths which the Buddhas have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out, reaching all. And then a general dedication prayer in Tibetan and English. Gewadi che bokun sonam yeshe sog shin sonam yeshe le jongwe damba koni to basho. By this virtue may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the two holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. Jangju sem chogrim boche ma che panam che jo chik che panyamba me baye gong ne gong du pel ba sho. May the precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. Okay, so thanks everybody. As mentioned, no class next week because our retreat's on. If you're interested in the retreat, I think we pretty much have a full house for on-site, but if anybody isn't registered and would like to do it online, then that's still an option. So thanks very much. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye. Thank you, Monica.